don't know.
All right, what are we going to do today?
Yes.
How much time are we dedicating to Amanda Nunes versus Juliana Pena?
Very fucking little. Because who gives a shit, Phil? That's how I feel about Amanda Nunes at this point. And Valentina.
Have you remembered that Juliana Pena got submitted by Jermaine Durandamy? Because I'd forgotten until today.
I actually had forgotten until this very moment.
Uh-huh. It was 2 fights ago. She's on a 1-fight winning streak.
Oh, well, that changes everything. Hello, folks, and welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, as always, Connor Rebush, and with me, as always, is Phil McKenzie. We've got, just an unbelievably stacked show for you this week. Frankly, it's one of those weeks again, Phil, where there's just too much on either side to even hope to cover all of it, even the interesting stuff. But it's a hell of a
problem to have.
It's a good problem to have, certainly. We're coming off of last weekend's Jose Aldo victory. Fuck you, Phil. I think I promised to say something rude to you after.
Well, I picked Jose Aldo.
Yeah, but you accused me. You only picked Jose Aldo because I picked him first, thereby making it my fault if he loses. So now whose fault is it that he won?
Mine. It was my belief that pushed him over the edge, that kept him in that fight and allowed him to find the key moments which swung it his way. Yeah, there was some swanging, certainly.
We had Aldo versus Font. Great fight. Brutal. Sort of had the vibe of like I don't want to say it could be a great last hurrah fight on Jose Aldo's career as things shake out. Mm-hmm. We're going to talk about that in segment 3, though, because in addition to, say, Fiziev versus Riddell, and Chris Curtis getting his second knockout in the UFC in a month, and Leonardo Santos having the worst luck of all time, and Clay Guida being given a $140 ring for entering the UFC Hall of Fame. In addition to all that, most of which is not going to make it into this episode at all, next week is the lightweight title fight between Charles Oliveira and Dustin Poirier, and also I'm pretty sure Amanda Nunes is fighting someone. So, there's a lot to cover, Phil, is my point.
So, that Amanda Nunes fight, then. That full segment. Wow.
You know what? I think we'll save that one. We'll save that one. I want to savor it when we get to it, right? It's going to be a small plate, so I really do want to savor it. I have very, very little to say about another Amanda Nunes title defense. Charles Oliveira, Dustin Poirier. There's a bunch of other stuff in this card, but you're honestly, we're just going to have to try to get to as much of it here as we can, and then even stuff like maybe, is Emmett Ige a Patreon fight, Phil? Is Cruz Munoz?
No, I'm feeling like back in the day, my massive hatred for Josh Emmett would have meant that it would be pay-per-view gold. People seem to really enjoy me hating fighters. But, I'm fine with Josh Emmett now.
He's not Giga Chikadze, is how you feel now.
Yeah. My hatred for him is now gone. It's vanished.
Wow.
It's now all.
What a powerful mind you have, Phil, that you can process your emotions so fully.
Yeah, I mean, it's not rational, but it is at least, consistent.
Is it? It seems rather inconsistent. But you know what?
I mean, I've decided that I will hate someone else, and now I hate someone else, and I'm fine with Josh Emmett.
It is consistent as Phil's whims.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the main event. This is one that I know you have some cockamamie theories on, Phil, or some things that, at least secret Phil things that you would like to see happen. I think it's an incredibly interesting matchup, and I really don't know how it shakes out. I certainly have a way I'm leaning, just sort of out of instinct. What do you say?
So it's once again, it's an elite lightweight fight, which doesn't involve either, Islam Makhachev in recent memory or Khabib Nurmagomedov in sort of a bit longer ago, which means that it's, to at least some extent, a big giant coin flip.
Yeah.
Means that there are obvious and clear paths to victory for either fighter, which any fool could pick out.
Yeah.
And I think, we mentioned that Michael Chandler is probably the most volatile of the elite lightweights. But it's not saying a whole lot. The obvious things about this one, Charles Oliveira is super hittable, super hittable.
Yeah.
And Dustin Poirier does not defend takedowns very good.
Yep.
Which means that if you want to particularly pick one of these guys, as you're not going to find like a lot of argument from me as to why you shouldn't.
Pretty much. It's the kind of fight where, like, I don't know, volatile as it is, it seems quite predictable up to a point. Because, like, now I'll give him credit. Charles Oliveira is less hittable than he used to be. He's certainly more dangerous to swing on than he used to be. That what little defense he has gained now comes with a much savvier counterpunching with quicker triggers. But basically he's going to get hit by Dustin Poirier, who's a huge hitter, and this is going to make him want to wrestle, which is probably going to work to an extent, right? So, like, I think both those things will happen, will be key factors in the first round, and it still does not really clue me in as to where the fight goes from there.
Yeah, there's...
If Michael Chandler is the most volatile, Charles Oliveira has got to be number 2, right?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why their fight was one of the like more entertaining ones to pick, because you're just like, I don't know how this is going to turn out. And then, true to form, it was just like the two of them dropping each other until one of them got finished.
Yep. And it wasn't the one you would have expected because top 5 lightweights. I think that rule. Let's just pick the least likely outcome in an otherwise predictable fight. Anyway, you were saying.
Given that, there are some interesting and fun things to think about in the context of this fight. Namely, the first one, obviously, Dustin Poirier might get knocked out by Charles Oliveira.
Ooh.
Him trying to negotiate his way in to someone who was just going to like jab and low kick him was a pretty ugly and tough fight against Dan Hooker.
Yeah.
Where admittedly, and where, he gave up a few takedowns. Other than that, there is a chance that Poirier could just get knocked out by Oliveira. On that, I still think there's actually a chance that Oliveira could get submitted by Poirier. Poirier jumps for a guillotine all the time. I don't think he does it because he's a moron. I think he does it because he has a good guillotine.
Sure.
There's...
even though it's like essentially at this point it's like Nick Lentz's guillotine. We've never actually seen it work.
Except that like Nick Lentz then did submit some people with it.
So it's actually worse than Nick Lentz's guillotine.
He's presumably been fighting better people. Apparently, the one I'm not a grappler, but apparently the one on Khabib was moderately close. But also, this is like. Charles Oliveira is, like Michael Chiesa, and, like Juliana Pena, we will be talking about later, for an elite grappler, he is quite submittable.
Yeah.
Because he is often so focused on being the offensive threat, he just charges right into his opponent's... He's so determined that he is the offensive grappler of the two, that he just charges into his opponent's offense without, because he forgets about it. apart from anything else, Michael Chandler got quite tight guillotine on Charles Oliveira, and Michael Chandler is less of a guillotine guy than Dustin Poirier is. He's a rear naked choke guy, but he's not I don't remember ever seeing him guillotine anyone.
You were about to get Wikipedia gotcha, and I'm scanning. Oh, I'm so sorry, Phil. In his 5th pro fight, there was a standing guillotine. Idiot! You fucking moron. Jesus.
Yeah, so... but these were really, like, characteristically Chiesa-y submission losses that he had.
Yeah.
They tended to be, like, him reshooting from his knees.
Yes.
In a scramble.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, he has lost to guillotine twice. That particular submission in a row, hilariously enough, which is another very Charles Oliveira kind of thing to happen. And I think in both cases it was him like reshooting from his knees and then seeing a little space and his instinct being to then just run as hard as he could to see if he could run the person over as they tried to back out of that tie-up. And
I think I picked him to beat Anthony Pettis because I was just like, oh yeah, I think he can probably kick at range with Pettis, but he's also just really aggressive and he's a very good wrestler, and I think he will in the ground exchanges. And that was sort of broadly true, but then also I forgot that he's just like kind of fun over-aggressive to the point of suicide. And admittedly, he wasn't like that against Tony Ferguson, but it's also hard to... It's increasingly hard to use Tony Ferguson as much of a measuring stick.
Yeah. Well, he didn't really have to get into any of those moments, It was like a risk assessment fight. It's like, I'm just going to hold these positions. This feels good. Yeah, I don't know. Actually, the funny thing about that Anthony Pettis fight for Charles Oliveira is that he's increasingly effective on the feet as it goes on. It is actually like a way grittier Charles Oliveira performance than I remember.
Yeah, I mean, he gets hurt pretty badly by a body kick at one point, and I was like, oh, is this it? And he kind of pulls it back together a bit.
Yeah, and is in tons and tons of exchanges. Like, there's a period in the first round of that fight where he's pressuring Pettis, and Pettis is just lighting him up. That's the other tricky thing about Charles Oliveira's volatility, is I swear I've had like 3 moments in the last couple years where I've been like, that's it. I'm done expecting Charles Oliveira to fold. And I kind of am. I mostly am. But it's like, I have seen, there are glimpses of tough Charles way back. And I cannot fully say what the difference is that actually gets him to appear to be so like mentally fragile, which I think is a bigger problem than anything else, because both he and Poirier can be tagged and hurt. But Poirier is now incredibly mentally durable, unless he's fighting Khabib. Even there's an exception. But it's really, really hard to shake Poirier. Like you named opposite shape to some extent of a fight like Oliveira Pettis. Poirier's fight with Dan Hooker seems like a good parallel here. He's got a actually significantly taller and slightly longer opponent who fights more like a long fighter as well. Hooker's much more of a long jab sort of boxer. And Poirier just kind of gets better the longer that fight goes on, and sharper. Like, he does figure it out, even though round 2 ends kind of horribly for him. His back is to the fence. It seems like a terrible place to be against Dan Hooker. He gets hit with like an 8-punch combination, and he is reeling on his feet. He starts round 3 looking refreshed and disciplined, and also it makes his stamina look better. It makes his chin appear better. The mental durability of Dustin Poirier is a big deal. I think that's sort of the instinct that has had me leaning towards him since the beginning. Is I'm like, oh, it looks like a volatile fight. The crazy violent shit is going to happen. Pick Dustin Poirier, right? That's just kind of my impulse.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an obvious stylistic reason not to pick Poirier, but he has also, like, honestly beaten better people than Charles Oliveira has.
Yeah.
Like, Oliveira versus Holloway was a very strong example of, like, not tough Oliveira, where he had a weird, really looked like they had a few exchanges, and Oliveira was just like, no, I don't want to fight this guy.
Yeah. Which fight is this?
Oliveira Holloway.
Oh, yeah. That's one of the most famous ones, where he's like, I had some kind of injury. It was a rare one.
Yeah.
Like, okay, we never heard about it again. Again?
Meanwhile, like, Poirier beat Holloway in one of the best fights of all time.
Yeah.
I think the interesting question is because I think Poirier is the known commodity. I'm curious what Oliveira we get. Because one of the, I think it would actually make sense for him. One of the types of fight that Oliveira has is that he just immediately charges his opponent and just runs them into the cage and tries to take them down immediately.
Sure.
He didn't do it against Chandler really, but he did it against like Will Brooks. He did it against Paul Felder. And he is a very, very good wrestler.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I've banged on about for years is that he's not just like a dangerous striker, but he is a very good wrestler. And Hooker did get, as I said, like almost everyone who has like gotten into takedown situations on Dustin Poirier has often been able to take him down. So I think the question is really like, I think is not will Poirier get taken down by Oliveira, because I think it's very likely that he will.
I agree.
Question is, does he survive that? And does he does he then get back to his feet, and is he able to run his game?
My instinct is also yes. Poirier got into trouble, say, in his fight with Jim Miller. He saved his ass by going to the ground and was perfectly competent there. Now, that was top position. He chose the takedown. I don't know. Who's a good instance of somebody who has... Most people who take Poirier down don't control him. But then again, most of them aren't Charles Oliveira.
Exactly.
Most have very little interest, I think, in controlling him. Yeah, it's like the Dan Hooker takedowns were just kind of perfunctory.
Hooker kept him down for a long time.
Yeah, I suppose.
I think this is in the third round.
Mm-hmm.
Hooker took him down, I think, into a Poirier guillotine.
Yes.
And then kept him down for like a good minute and a half.
Okay. Eddie Alvarez, of course, mounted him against the fence and hit him with an elbow that lost him their fight.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is one of the things about Poirier that sort of was an issue against Nurmagomedov, is that he really is a wall walker.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think that should work.
And he also instinctively puts his back to the fence on the feet. He's happy to counterpunch. He likes people to overextend themselves. I think Poirier's ring generalship has gotten better, even over just these last couple fights. But what that really amounts to is just like not getting all the way backed into the fence and still holding his stance together. And again, the worst of those recent performances, in terms of that kind of thing, was the Hooker fight, where it suggests that the tall, long guy did make him a little more uncomfortable and push him around space a little more effectively. I don't know, Phil. It's a coin flip. I mean, I don't know. These are the dynamics. Who has a strong advantage? I'm just going to say Dustin Poirier, because he hits super hard. He's a way better defensive fighter. He just makes better tactical adjustments on the feet. And he, while having not faced Charles Oliveira ever, also... the only other guy to submit him in the last, 10 years was Khabib.
Yeah. Also, he hasn't fought any even really semi-defensive wrestlers in that time span.
Any what now?
Hasn't really fought any decent offensive wrestlers in that time span either.
I know, it's true.
You know, that is the challenge. It's just strikers. Apart, I mean, you know, the Alvarez, the Jim Miller,
yeah,
Big Green,
yeah.
I mean, the best person he fought before, the best offensive wrestler he fought before Khabib was a still finding his way Carlos Diego Ferreira.
Sure.
He knocked out in the first round.
Or maybe like
didn't really matter.
Korean Zombie, the best like wrestler grappler before that, and that was in 2012.
And he got submitted.
Yeah, well, you know, he hung tough the whole time. He got worn out. It wasn't a bad grappling showing for Poirier.
Yeah. No, I think I'm also going to take Poirier. I don't think he gives up his. I don't think he puts himself into submission danger. I think Jim Miller at the least is Jim Miller and pronounced scrambles with Anthony Pettis, I think, are good landmarks for how Poirier is at defending pure submission grappling. I think his tendency to wall walk and is probably better against Oliveira than it is, against Khabib, who is obviously one of MMA's finest cage grapplers. Well, I mean, he is MMA's finest cage grappler.
Yeah.
But I do think he can survive the takedowns. I won't be shocked if we see a fight where Oliveira charges out and just takes him down, and then Poirier has to spend an entire round trying to fight out of it, and then it gets shockingly tapped towards the end of it. Nor will I be particularly surprised to see him lose an entire round to grappling, then come out and then lose the next round to grappling as well.
Sure.
Oliveira is upright and hittable, but he can actually. One of the things he has gotten a lot better at isn't just his, as you mentioned, it's not necessarily just his defense, but his ability to change levels under strikes.
He's just gotten way better at reading everything. He's got a much more natural rhythm on the feet now. He feints. He anticipates defensively, whether it's changing levels under strikes, which he does much better. He used to panic and rush that move really badly. It was part of what I think made him more of a 1 or 2 round fighter back in the day. But he's also way better at he can sort of feel when the right hand is coming off the jab, even when he can't see it, and he will in advance, to roll his head or take a pivot or whatever. He's a more experienced fighter. So I don't think it's even really a matter of being much more technical, but being way more assured and comfortable in his technique. Yeah, I don't know. There's a frustrating lack of data, I think, for Poirier in some ways, and then a frustrating lack of trust in Charles Oliveira, which I'm sure will be my downfall as a fight picker here. That whenever I expect Charles Oliveira to fold, he doesn't. Like you were saying, what if Oliveira wins 2 rounds? That wouldn't be a surprise. Would it be a surprise if after that then Poirier knocks him out? Because that wouldn't surprise me either. It's just that kind of fight. Every round is going to be a new country. And that is the other thing, by the way. I do trust Poirier in a 5-round fight more. I have seen him get tired, worryingly early in a fight, and then collect himself and do quite well after that, regardless. So.
But also, yeah, I'm just less. Even aside from just the questions of raw mental and physical durability, I am less convinced that given time against someone that he's not much taller than or much more athletic than, that Poirier isn't just going to eat the hardest punch that his opponent can throw at some point.
Oh yeah,
which I am genuinely quite sure about with Charles Oliveira.
Sure. But now I've watched him eat Conor McGregor's best punches and really not have an issue.
Yeah. I mean, he's generally doing something to mitigate it. Whereas, Oliveira, if the fight goes long, the opponent is going to hit him very hard at some point.
Sure.
He's going to get absolutely clocked.
Yep.
And yeah, I'm still not sure I can trust him to survive that. So yeah, I think I am picking Poirier, but as you said, it's just a big coin flip.
Yep. Nothing to complain about. Just hard to pick.
Oh no. It should be absolutely fantastic.
How could it not be?
For as long as it lasts.
This
is the other great thing about these elite lightweight matchups is that they're all just like guaranteed excitement.
Pretty much. All right. Well, speaking of guaranteed excitement, Phil, let's take a quick break, and the one you've all been waiting for after this: Amanda Nunes versus Juliana Pena, and then possibly I feel like that's going to take 2 segments, but hopefully we can squeeze in another couple fights from this card before we move on to Aldo versus Font. All of that and other things probably as well after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. Now begins our trek through the UFC 269 undercard. Doesn't yet have Chris Curtis on it. Did you hear that, Phil? He asked to fight on this card after knocking out Brendan Allen last week, but who knows? Time will tell. At the moment, it's got the co-main event, women's bantamweight title fight. Please, everyone, calm down. Return to your seats. I know the women's bantamweight title has so much legacy, and cachet among hardcore fans, and I'm sure all of them are thrilled to see it challenged by Juliana Pena. We've got Jeff Neal, Santiago Ponzinibbio, which is kind of depressing. We got Kai Kara-France versus Cody Garbrandt, which is a different kind of depressing. Raulian Paiva versus Sean O'Malley is fine, I guess. Dominic Cruz versus Pedro Munoz is kind of depressing. A lot of interesting, weird benchmark fights, as you said, Phil, all down this card. Nunes Pena. Anything?
I mean, Pena, I think, in the form that she was when she sort of started in the UFC, or at least started making waves after The Ultimate Fighter, would in some ways be a sort of challenging matchup for Amanda Nunes. I don't think this is a complete lock of all locks, kind of horrible, unwinnable matchup, because I still think it's probably possible to go after Nunes and out-wrestle her. I just don't think it's particularly likely, and Pena hasn't looked good lately.
No. She used to be like
a fight against Sarah McMahon was terrible.
Yeah. She used to be like a female Colby Covington with like worse technical wrestling, but she was a super aggressive pace fighter who would take you down and get on top of you and smash you. And now I think she's just sort of a walk-in identity crisis as a fighter.
Yeah, I mean, she really reminds me a lot of Cynthia Calvillo, and that's not a good thing.
No, it is not. That is a great comparison. She, it's not even like that McMahon fight was entirely a referendum on her wrestling, though it was that in part. I did hear, by the way, I think in last week's card, the commentary booth, were saying all Bisping and DC both agreed that wrestling is the thing that goes first if you don't work on it, which has sort of been I can't speak to that, but has sort of been my experience watching fighters. Certainly John Jones is a very notable example of somebody whose wrestling went because he stopped using it. That seems to be the case with Juliana Pena. And I don't know that she was ever a tremendously good technical wrestler, again, to begin with. But she now seems to want to strike, like Cynthia Calvillo. And like Cynthia Calvillo, not only has it made her worse on the ground, she's just not really good at it. So, like, she largely lost the stand-up portions of that fight with Sarah McMahon as well.
Yeah, which all basically says that, like, she can recover some kind of original, just pure aggression form. She might be able to make something happen.
Yeah.
But even then, she's just going to get torched.
It's a long shot.
Yeah. And it's just going to get utterly brutalized at range. All right, done.
Yep. All right. Welterweights, Jeff Neal, Santiago Ponzinibbio. Strangely sad. This actually feels like, now that I think about it, the true welterweight fight. Because this is a division of dinosaurs and elephant bones. And both of these guys, man, it was not that long ago that I was sure they were going to challenge for the title. And now I kind of feel sure they won't. So, I don't know.
Yeah, this is really the who is just going out of this division kind of.
Basically.
Right. You know what? I'm going to pick Jeff Neal.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Pons looked dreadful against the Leech, and he looked dreadful against Baeza early.
Yep.
Like, he's going to take a round to get into it. Jeff Neal is not as eminently hittable as Miguel Baeza is.
Yeah.
It's not going to be just a question of, like, if you go after him, he's going to be there. It's still going to be, even if Ponzinibbio is in good form, it will be a hard fight for him. But given the fact that he seems to look like complete trash for at least the first round of his fights, I've got to pick Neal.
Yeah, the thing with Jeff Neal is that I think he's just sort of been revealed to be a little more limited than we thought.
Yeah.
The thing with Ponzinibbio is that he's sliding back. So, yeah, I totally agree.
And also, like, Jeff Neal, big southpaw, Pons seems to really like his best work when he's jabbing people up. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just don't trust him to get into the fight early enough.
Now that I think about it, that Ponzinibbio Baeza fight was like a really low-level version of Aldo Font. Like, that's one where, like, Ponzinibbio seemed to start it with, like, a certain idea of how this kind of fight would go. And then Baeza was like, oh, this guy's surprisingly, like, fast and is, like, hitting me. And I'm actually, like, I have an idea of what I'm supposed to do, but I'm not doing any of it quick enough. And then he ended up having to have to, like, leverage his better fundamentals into just a gritty, dirty-ass performance.
Yep.
So, you know, it's a less tremendous last hurrah kind of fight, but it does have that same kind of feeling I spoke about earlier, where it's like, that may have just been the exact moment when you could still win that with what you still got, but I could really
it was
see
veteran savvy to employ a toolbox which might not be there the next time around.
Yeah, and he had to gut that toolbox, gut the tools out of that box. Like, they were suddenly way heavier than he remembered them being. He had to dig super hard to get them. And, a better offensive fighter like Jeff Neal, putting him through the same rigors early doesn't seem like a great fit. All right, what about the rest of the main card? We're just zooming along here. Another sort of benchmarky fight, Kai Kara-France versus Cody Garbrandt. To me, this one is... Kai Kara-France is just a superior technical fighter. He's frankly a much deeper fighter than Cody Garbrandt. Skill wise, I think Kai Kara-France is very good. In fact, he does not have Cody Garbrandt's power or speed. So it's an athleticism is cheating kind of benchmark fight. How good of a cheater are you still, Cody Garbrandt? And then the other question to me is that we have, for the past two fights, seen a Mark Henry-fied version of Cody Garbrandt. And while it still might be a learning period, and that often that results in a lackluster sort of a couple performances, they have been lackluster. Even the one against Rafael Assunção which he won, was not a good performance. It just sort of shook out the right way, and Sun Tzu was also old. Against Rob Font, frankly, a terrible performance. Nothing really went right at all for Cody Garbrandt. He had a couple of good ideas. He had a couple moments. The entire fight was one-way traffic in a bigger picture sense. So I am curious. Has Cody Garbrandt slipped enough, basically, for a very technical but physically limited counterpuncher like Kai Kara-France to beat him?
Yeah, it's a real weird one.
It doesn't feel like innately like a good matchup for Kai Kara-France. A matchup where it seems likely he'll have to do the pursuing first of all. Doesn't seem.
I mean, I think Kara-France really. I think Kara-France is much happier when he can be aggressive.
I think to a point. I'm really curious to see what happens with the on his bicycle Cody Garbrandt. Kai Kara-France is short-armed. He's not particularly fast. What fights of his stand out to you as ones where he looked really happy to come forward the whole time?
It is more just that, like, it's more like the fights where things have gone wrong. Mm-hmm. Just watching him being overwhelmed by Brandon Moreno and what's his face, crazy guy,
Brandon Royval.
Royval, yes. He's just, I think, like many technical fighters, he is a thinker.
Yeah.
And if you give him chances to set up his jab and his cross and sort of like mix up his timing, throw his combinations, I think he's like, he is a thoughtful, clean technician who can make a structured game work. And I think, a Garbrandt who runs away will give him room to do that. I think there's also an interesting question of, like, does Garbrandt wrestle him?
He's gonna.
Which is what you would think if he's coming down from...
He's gonna.
Yeah, if he's coming down from Bantamweight, he should, because that was, one of the things that happened in the Bontarine fight, which otherwise Kai Kara-France won relatively handily, is that Bontarine just threw him on the floor.
It was also next to, like, 3 minutes of low kicking and 1 minute extremely spread out between of jabbing. The wrestling was like the only success Cody Garbrandt had against Rob Font. It worked quite well. He's quick. He has good reaction time still. He can still pull the trigger, and I think it makes reactive shots a really natural sort of move for him. Yeah, that's going to happen. I'm quite sure of that.
Yeah, so I'll pick him in an ugly fight.
Oh, God. He's going to look like shit, is the thing. Like,
Yep.
The problem with the Mark Henry sort of approach that Garbrandt is taking now is I don't think it really meshes with the things he innately does well. Garbrandt is such a... It's weird because he has like these great athletic perks. Super heavy-handed, super quick. And yet he has like the extreme limitations of a much less athletic man. Maybe it's just mental bandwidth. He's not that much he can invest his brain power in learning. I don't know, but there's a pretty narrow slice of like range and type of fight where Garbrandt is really comfortable and can actually put things together. And even that narrow slice, namely standing in the pocket, throwing super quick combinations, is the thing that gets him into trouble. So I understand why he's trying to work away from it, but the result, at least as we saw in these last two fights, is a lot of movement that does not lead Cody Garbrandt. I mean, he's like the opposite of Kai Kara-France to an extent. I think it doesn't take much pressure to overwhelm Cody. I think the less thinking he does, the better. If you put him in an exchange and make him react, he can actually make some really good reads until such point as he gets hurt. Now he's become a guy who can stay disciplined and safe when he gets tagged, but will not allow himself to drift into the pocket to get the to get those quick trigger reads that make him so dangerous. So I don't know. It just feels very disjointed. If Cody Garbrandt, like, if he comes into this fight having really, really worked on his jab and is actually happy to throw it, he's got such a good jab. That alone could make a tremendous difference in bridging the gap from this more evasive style to the effective pocket puncher that he used to be.
I mean, especially as he will be fighting a much shorter fighter than Rob Font.
Yes, absolutely. And even against Rob Font, he was super competitive when he jabbed with him. So, I mean, I would love to see it. There's something strangely endearing about Cody Garbrandt. He's got the Tito Ortiz effect. He's kind of lovable despite himself. I would like to see him come in here and use that left hand, but until I see that moment, fuck it. I'll pick Kai Kara-France over him. I know it's stupid. I don't care.
Yeah. And people tend to look bad when they have their first fights at new weight classes.
Yeah.
And the proportional difference between flyweight and bantamweight is the biggest in the men's divisions.
Yeah. Why not? What about the main card opener then, since we appear to just be running through the whole main card here? Raulian Paiva, Sean O'Malley, the teammate angle is what they're going for here. Paiva had a frankly, like, slightly fortunate decision win. It felt justified, but also there's a pretty good case, I think, to give Kyler Phillips the nod over him. Probably should have been a draw, to be honest. It was that kind of fight. But now he's in here against Sean O'Malley, who, for sort of intangible reasons, Phil, feels like a much more dangerous matchup to me. And I think it comes down to volume and accuracy. Because in that fight with Kyler Phillips, Paiva was plenty hittable. He's just not fast. It's crazy that this guy used to be a flyweight. But even here at bantamweight, he's not quick. He has a head forward, front weighted sort of style. Super insistent on pressuring. Just not a, he's a pretty good counterpuncher, but one of those counterpunchers that doesn't have any defense. And he just like walked into big, loaded up power counters over and over against Kyler Phillips. I think the problem here is that instead of walking into big, loaded up counters, he's going to step forward and eat 4 punches that are straight and long and not overcommitted.
And that O'Malley is less likely, as we've seen in recent fights, to tire himself out with his own offense.
Yeah, he's certainly not going to go out there and try to out-wrestle Paiva over and over.
Just like spring through space trying to punch him repeatedly.
Yeah. He is O'Malley has had problems where pressure has worn him out a little bit, and he has felt his own pace in past fights. Loathsome as he is, it's worth remembering that he's a young fighter who's still learning, and I think we have seen recently that like he can actually keep a pretty good output. And stay moving around for 3 rounds as long as he isn't getting badly freaked out. And I just don't think it may not go that far. Paiva's hit ability against O'Malley seems like a way bigger liability than against Phillips, because it's not the first shot that hits you on the counter that knocks you out, even though it very nearly did when Phillips landed those right hands in round 1. It's the second and third and fourth shot. It's the shot that you don't see coming. It's the shot where you don't think you're in range. And O'Malley is just super accurate with his hands. I think that's the problem.
Yeah, I mean it's basically the Cheeto fight but softer. O'Malley. It's just a plodding, durable person who's going to come after him a bunch.
Yep.
But yeah, it's softer. I think I'll probably also take O'Malley, but obviously I will laugh a lot.
Oh yeah.
If Paiva just walks him down and boxcar homers the shit out of him, or if O'Malley's foot happens to fall off again,
that would be good too. Yeah, and I will say Paiva. I think we saw this in his fight with Phillips. Again, somewhat surprising for a flyweight having moved up to bantamweight. He looked pretty damn effective as a wrestler. I'll give him that. He's a pretty savvy body lock wrestler. He's a great scrambler. Always has been. I think that's how he got away with being such a weird, gangly, slow guy at flyweight for so long. So if he can tank early damage and make some wrestling exchanges happen, and that causes O'Malley to freak out a bit and get tired, then yeah, it could happen. I'm not mistrusting Paiva's toughness. It's just I think he might get overwhelmed. Like I'm basically picking an O'Malley TKO in the first half of the fight.
Yep, I tend to agree.
All right, let's take a break then. When we come back, Jose Aldo versus Rob Font. Whose fault is it? That and more after this break.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
All right, let's go for it.
Oh, God. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. Let's talk about last weekend's main event. Really, this should be the first segment. It should be the entire segment of the show. And am I talking about Jose Aldo defying Father Time once again? No. Talking about Conor Rebush defying Father Phil, who tried to blame me, tried to anticipate. I mean, frankly, in an act of profound cowardice, only picked Jose Aldo himself because a certain brave host was willing to step off that ledge first. And Phil, I'm just waiting for, I imagine you have something to say.
I was always going to pick Jose Aldo.
Oh, that's not the apology I expected, but go on. That's interesting.
What I took from you was your undying sense of confidence that he would slaughter Rob Font on the feet. A one-sided drubbing. That was what I took with me into watching this fight.
Uh-huh. So I was actually wrong.
Don't worry, Jose's got this.
So I was actually still wrong, is what you're trying to say.
I mean, maybe. It sounds like it's what you're saying.
I didn't expect a one-sided drubbing. I will say, it did not go... I think this is a great indication of how much better Rob Font has gotten this fight. Because, first of all, Rob Font had plenty of opportunities to decide that maybe he just wanted to survive. Plenty. Jose Aldo put him on rubber legs like 4 separate times. If we include the actual knockdowns, like he hurt him very visibly 4 or maybe 5 times in the fight. Rob Font did not change his approach. He remained aggressive. He was just like super duper determined. And even Jose Aldo's specific attempts to counter the jab, the basis of Rob Font's game, the thing that when it got taken away against Rafael Sunsao, he was like completely diminished. In other words, the main reason I thought Jose Aldo could neutralize him, he just kept throwing it and kept putting things behind it. He just said, fuck it. You can counter it. I'm going to try and solve that with feints and volume and continuing to use it at such a pace that your counters don't, that I just do more damage to you. It didn't end up working, but it was a very brave approach, I think, that Rob Font took. At the same,
that was one of the things I was really thinking about this fight after I watched it. It's just like, oh, fucking Rob Font, man.
Yeah.
I mean, he really came out and gave it his all.
Yes.
And one of the things I often like to do with fights is just to like swap the fighters in my head to see what the emotional response would be.
Mm-hmm.
And
like, what if I really loved Rob Font? What if I was
how the grief people would have had Jose Aldo had been basically, was fighting in Rob Font's body and had that performance.
Yeah.
And Rob Font was the one who just kept rocking him at the ends of the rounds.
Yeah.
Genuine. You imagine the amount
tragedy.
of people would just be like, young fighter bullshit coming out of nowhere.
Yeah. It would be me.
Technical.
I would be really mad and sad and.
Technical process should have won this fight. Instead, it was just athleticism and power and.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, because he fought a fantastic fight, and then as mentioned, he would just kind of get rocked a bunch. And I think as you've been mentioning throughout the episode today, this felt like a kind of ragged performance from Jose.
Now, again, we have to take in context of how well Rob Font did. That's the thing that still has me a little uncertain. I think Rob Font turned this into a much tougher stylistic matchup than it could have been. Just with sheer determination and toughness and, determination to stick to, by the way, a really consistent technical game that works. Setting big power shots off your jab just works. And if you don't let your jab get taken away, it's going to continue to work the whole time. I didn't think Jose looked bad, but I also thought he did look a step slower than I think he expected to feel.
Yes.
It was one of those fights where he was making the right moves, and just on pure speed and reaction time was no longer quick enough. Specifically with the jab. And that's part of the reason that Font, I probably refused to have it taken away. It was working constantly. This fight, I think the UFC posted a tweet. It has the second highest, what's the word I'm looking for? The second highest.
Differential?
Yeah, differential between strikes landed of any fight won by the less active striker other than Condit Lawler. And it's a lot clearer than Condit Lawler because, Robbie Lawler didn't rock Carlos Condit 4 or 5 times. But still, it was like Rob Font just tattooing Jose Aldo's face with the jab and really racking up a big numbers lead on him as a result. And Aldo was trying to do his little pull thing, and it was trying to slip, and as the fight went on, I think he found more of those. He sort of keyed in. But ultimately what won the fight for Jose Aldo, as you said, was power. It's sort of like a Cub Swanson, a Korean Superboy kind of thing, where this, in this instance, veteran savvy revealed itself in just savagery. He's like an old lion, just getting super fucking pissed and going for the kill when the other one thinks it's a game. That was sort of the kind of vibe that Aldo had as he stole round after round that were otherwise really not going his way for the most part.
I mean, I think it was also the fact that his defensive reactions were always doing something for him. As in, those Rob Font jabs were rarely landing clean.
Yeah,
he was generally taking something off them. Not that they weren't meaningful strikes.
They closed up his eye by the end of the fight, but it's still good to have some kind of defense. And his kick defense, by the way, still beautiful, still on point, better than anyone else.
But yeah, a lot of what Font was sort of trying to push Aldo out of the position to land something significant.
Yeah.
And in a weird kind of stubborn way, Aldo was not really letting that happen very much.
Yeah.
He was just I'm willing to take glancing jabs as long as I am never out of position. Then, every now and again, he would just catch Font standing completely square.
Yep.
If a hard right hand had Font completely shocked as to like what had just happened.
Which does relate to a couple of things that I did talk about. As always seems to be the case, Phil, when I get a fight prediction right, it's right in like a, like it's actually wrong kind of way, where I have to like twist my own words to be like, here is actually how they apply. There's a grain of truth in much of our analysis from last week, but as always, it's like you see that the result is like that truth viewed through a funhouse mirror. So like, as you just mentioned, Aldo was, and I thought this would be key, super determined not to give ground. He didn't want to let Rob Font build like a Max Holloway type lead as he did against Cody Garbrandt. And in this case, that meant eating a lot of those jabs because Font just had the reach and a super effective range weapon and was incredibly active with it. But I think it was, can you imagine what might have happened if Aldo had started giving ground more readily, if he had not decided as early as he did, okay, I'm going to have to eat a lot of these jabs? It probably would have been a much worse fight for him. Because otherwise, Rob Font, the stuff Font was putting behind that jab was really clever. Like, this was a great body punching performance from Rob Font.
Big wide right to the body.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Super effective punch, easy to land, and does a really, really great job. Like, I was just waiting for one of those to come over and Jose expecting the body shot and it to just clip him across the chin and knock him out. He was really consistent with sending that right hand to the ribs, and that's just a great shot to land and a great way to set up the right hand upstairs and befuddle the defensive fighter on the end of that jab as to what comes after the jab lands or doesn't. So yeah, like Font I think would have built in a really dangerous way if Aldo hadn't been so stubborn, even if that stubbornness more than ever before meant actually taking lots of shots. The other thing was Rob Font. I talked about him being really heavy on his front foot and getting out too far when he jabs over his front foot, and those were the moments I think when Aldo really hurt him. As you said, he would fall in after his jab, and his feet would get squared up, and then he would just get cracked super clean. And so as it turns out, refusing to let the jab or anything, yours or theirs, put you out of position turned out to be a really, really good decision for Jose Aldo. Because maybe if Rob Font hadn't thrown himself out of position like that and Aldo hadn't capitalized on those moments, he wouldn't have hurt Rob Font quite so many times. And a lot of rounds that were, frankly, this is like the least clear 50-45, 49-46 kind of fight ever. That scorecard tells you nothing about how competitive the fight was.
It was every fight. The whole time I was worried that it was going to. I was just like, is it going to slip away?
Yeah.
As you mentioned, like Rob Font was incredibly game the whole time.
Yeah.
Certain things still surprised me. How little Aldo was able to jab with Font.
Mm-hmm.
Like his counters to the jab, throughout the fight were pretty much cross counter, which didn't really work that often. Font had sort of trained to slip to the right and then come back with an uppercut.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on in the fight, he keyed into low kicking him much more. But yeah, it was a great performance by Rob Font, really was, and it was, as you mentioned, kind of just like veteran savvy and depth of toolkit that won it from Aldo, and sometimes won it in, it was a very chaotic. It was him being able to capitalize on the chaos kind of way.
Yeah.
Like a big turning point, I think, was that in the third round where Font tried to shoot on Aldo and completely flubbed it.
Yeah.
Turned it into like a terrible Imanari roll and then gave up the rest of the round in top position.
Yep.
Aldo was like, oh.
Aldo's entire career, this is why, like, if this is the beginning of the end, where next time we see Aldo and his reactions are finally gone, you know, he's just too slow or he really can't pull the trigger. We already came close to that moment. We thought the Volkanovski fight was like, oh shit, Aldo can't pull the trigger anymore. So I'm not saying this is the beginning of the end. Jose Aldo is an incredible, once-in-a-lifetime kind of fighter. But if it is, could there be a better last hurrah than a fight in which Jose Aldo only wins because of like 3 or 4 incredibly crucial decisions he makes? Because that is kind of Jose Aldo's career as a champion, at least. Is just like when the chips are down, making the right decision under pressure, winning key moments. That's Aldo. He's the least consistent, brilliant fighter I've ever seen. You know, that exchange doesn't go the right way. You don't stuff that takedown, whatever. And who knows how many of his fights could have gone differently, but that's why he's so impressive. He makes the right decision. He wins those incredibly critical exchanges or moments when they need to be won. And, yeah, it was awesome. I mean, it was heartrending and thrilling and, yeah, mixed emotions, but what a fight. And, I came away loving Jose Aldo as much as ever and also really, really respecting the hell out of Rob Font. Because again, I thought he fought a fantastic fight. Speaking of people...
Absolutely. And you know, I don't think it even got fight of the night.
Did it not? Oh, Cheyenne Vlismus.
Yeah, I know. They gave it something super crazy and weird.
Huh?
Not Riddell Eve.
That was a good performance,
I mean, admittedly,
too,
they gave it...
from Vlismus. Vlismus's was a good performance, but fight of the night?
Yeah, it was fine.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. It was fun, but come on.
Yeah.
That's sucks. I mean, she deserves it more. Aldo doesn't need it.
Yeah.
Whatever, probably she's poorer, whatever, but that sucks. Yeah, okay, well, thanks for listening, everybody. Lots of good fights. One of those weeks where there's just way too much shit to cover. Fortunately, Louis Daukhaus is our next card coming up, and, well, it's not bad. To be honest, it's actually a pretty solid card, so we will definitely have...
Isn't it? Have a look.
It's kind of okay. It's got Hill versus Lemos. It's got Swanson versus Elkins, which is like a depressing old man fight, but cool, whatever. Hani Barcelos versus Trevin Jones. Asuncao versus Simone. I don't like that. Stephen Thompson versus Bilal Muhammad. Got some shit. It's not bad.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Not uninteresting.
No. It's compelling at the very least. So we'll be back next week to talk to you about whatever we can manage from that. And fingers crossed that Oliveira Poirier is just boring and sucks. So we don't have to spend too much of next week's episode breaking it down. Anyway, until then, find Phil on Twitter at EvilGregJackson. Find me at BoxingBush, B-U-S-C-H. Go to our Patreon. You will hear more bonus content from this recording session. Talking about Jose Aldo versus Rob Font's undercard and a little more from the Oliveira Poirier undercard as well. And come to us next week for that other stuff. Until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands. With a heavy sigh.